Welcome to Winning Hand, the podcast about Marvel Champions, one card at a time. This is episode 42, all about mind control is the card of the day today. My name is, as always, Boomguy, and I am here today with a special guest, Bendrix. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. How's it going, man?
Really, really good. Apparently it's pretty hot, but other than that, it's good.
Yeah, well, it's summer. So quick disclaimer for everybody listening. I do know Bendrix IRL, as people say these days. That stands for in real life. You are part of the...
Fortunately or unfortunately.
Well, you know, some days some days the other. We know each other from the local game group, so so we go back a little bit. But it's your first time here on the podcast, so I want the listeners to have a chance to get to know you. So before we get to the card of the day, I've got a couple quick questions for you. Are you ready?
Fire away.
All right. So first question I ask everybody is, when did you get into the game, and what's been kind of your journey with the game?
Well, I was a longtime Game of Thrones player of the LCG Game of Thrones back in the day. And then when they went to a new edition, I said never again. And I've been a longtime comic book fan. And so I saw Marvel Champions in the store and I said, well, it's a good thing. I'm not going to waste any more money on card games. And then I tried it and I was hooked. And it was about 2 or 3 months after the game came out. And I've gotten every expansion as they came out since then because I'm an addict.
So did you start with, so when you got in, was it just the core set or had any packs been released?
I think it was just the core set. Maybe Captain America and Miss Marvel had come out at that point, but I'm pretty sure it was very slim pickings. It was the fall, I think, that it was released that I got the core set.
And what is your favorite hero to play?
This should be a difficult question, but given the number of plays I have with this hero, I have to say without a doubt it is Phoenix. Phoenix is my favorite hero, my go-to. I love her style, her play style. I love the variety of choices that you can make with any given play, whether it's restrained or unrestrained. And I think her cards are very powerful. And I love the character. So that is indeed my favorite hero without question.
I have good news for you then, because we're going to talk about one of her cards a little bit later.
No way.
I know. Brace yourself.
This is exciting.
Yeah. No, I'm glad. I'm glad you came in blind with no idea what we were going to do today. What is your favorite aspect in the game to play?
Before I met you, Boomguy, it was protection. And then you came on the scene and you decided protection was your favorite. And then I had to get creative and find another one. And now that you are no longer local, I can say protection is in fact my favorite aspect. I just feel that you can get really creative and it's not necessarily game breaking. And you also can be a support to the other players, not just taking hits, but my favorite aspect, my favorite thing to do within the game is canceling the villain. Not necessarily with stuns and confuses, but just board control and making it feel like I'm toying with the villain.
It's a good shout. Protection is quite excellent. So what's generally your favorite player count, or what do you play at the most?
Well, what I play at the most is generally solo. I have a small child at home, and getting together with a bunch of people tends to not go over well with my current home situation. I still game with the regular group, but I alternate between solo and two-handed. Two-handed is a little complex for my taste and a lot of setup, but sometimes I kind of need it just so I can get all the interactions that Champions allows players between the heroes that they play.
And favorite villain or scenario to play?
That is a really tough one. I'm going to have to think about it a little bit. I can tell you some least favorites, but that's probably not positive.
We try to be positive here.
Yeah, we definitely try to be positive. I'm going to have to go with... I'm a big fan of the Marauders. I think it's the one time that they nailed the multiple villains in a way that's not too confusing or too complicated for my tiny mind, and just going through different villains and having variety within the play style. I'm a big fan of that modular, both of them, the On the Run, and I can't recall what the other one is off the top of my head, but the 2 stages in Next Evolution.
That's the first 2 scenarios, right?
That is.
Yeah. No, those are interesting. It doesn't feel like a true multi-villain scenario because they come up one at a time. It is a multi-villain scenario, but it feels very different from like the Four Horsemen or Sinister Six, for example. But I think that it's interesting that it's almost like a standard villain, right? You have one, and then you go to the next stage, essentially. But the next stage is a different villain with totally different stuff. I think that's really cool. So I agree. I think that's a good one.
Yeah, the other aspect I really like about it is the villains reappear as minions. So it really feels like a team effort on the part of the villains trying to take the heroes down. Whereas even in like Sinister Six and Four Horsemen, it feels like the villains are completely independent of each other, and you're just fighting one at a time rather than fighting, say, Grey Crow as the main villain and then Vertigo as the minion and Blockbuster as another minion. It feels like a team effort on the villain's part.
That's a good shout. Are you a X-Men fan generally?
I was a huge X-Men fan in high school, and I kind of drifted away from the X-Men, and I thought it was a little overwrought, especially as the MCU came out. But this set of Marvel Champions from Mutant Genesis onward has re-inspired my love for the X-Men and made me remember how much I loved those comics when I was in high school, junior high and high school.
So X-Men 97, I'm guessing, has been a hit with you.
Well, I was really skeptical because I'm a little older than the general population that plays Marvel Champions. And when X-Men came out, the original cartoon came out, I was already in college, and it didn't jive with me very well, so I didn't follow it at all. And then people kept insisting that I try it out, and I thought it was just more of the same until that episode. And if someone had told me what happens in that episode, I think it's episode 5, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but that episode made me change my mind on X-Men 97, and I'm a big fan of it now.
I have been watching X-Men 97. People said, the last few months, people said, you should watch, it's awesome. And I thought, I don't know, like I'm not a big cartoons guy, whatever. And then I decided I would, but I heard that it's a kind of direct sequel almost to the original cartoon in the 90s, which also I didn't watch. So I decided I would go back and start there, and then just kind of, X-Men 97 is supposed to be almost just a new season of that. So I went back and started that, and man, that was awful. I couldn't watch more than a few episodes. It was kind of dumb. But then people kept telling me, so then I did just skip all that and went to X-Men 97 and have been quite enjoying it. And I also don't want to spoil anything. I'm about where you just said. I think I've seen that episode. I think that's where I'm at. So I know what you're talking about, but I don't know much more than that.
And really, they pulled a trick with the new iteration of it, the 97 version of it, because it really is, for all intents and purposes, the first series with just a slightly better animation. They go through the same tropes, but then it gets considerably more, I don't want to say grim and grittier, but it becomes a little more, they couldn't air a lot of it on Fox Kids in 1997. Just put it that way.
Yeah, the first one was a kids show. It was meant as a cartoon for kids. And this one is meant as a cartoon for the people who watched that when they were kids. So it's designed for the same audience, but different demographic. All right, well, thank you for going through all those questions and letting listeners get to know you. I'm happy to have you here. And I'm excited to talk about the card of the day, which was one that you recommended. So
after much deliberation.
Yeah, we went back and forth trying to decide what card, and I think you picked a really awesome one. I'm really excited to talk about it. So before we do that, why don't you read the card for us, and then we'll start talking about it, if you don't mind.
Mind Control. It's an upgrade. It costs 4. Its traits are Condition and Psionic, which is very important, which we'll talk about later. Mm-hmm. You attach it to a non-elite minion. You take control of attached minion and treat it as a controlled ally with a blank text box. Its thwart is equal to its printed scheme, and it takes 1 consequential damage after it thwarts or attacks. And it is a mental resource card.
Well, there's a lot to talk about here. There's a lot of text there. Before we talk about the text, I want to talk about the art. So obviously this is a podcast. We can't show people. They can look it up on their own. But just to kind of describe it, well, first I'll say this is custom art by Eduardo Mayo. I don't know how to say that. Mello. We've seen other cards by the same artist. And I will say the art is quite good. But describing it, it's Sabretooth, right? And he has the little pink kind of, I don't know what that
aura, halo.
Yeah, like around his face. He's clearly affected by the psionic energy. And he has kind of a blank expression in his eyes. Looks, to indicate he's being controlled, I guess. And his mouth is kind of open, and it's very like close on his face. You can see a little bit of his body around him. And there's just like a little bit of background. You can't really see. It's just kind of blue behind him. But I think the art is quite striking. What do you think?
I think it is striking, and it's only since I started examining it that I thought about ways I would change it. I didn't think much about it, the art one way or the other. I do think it's functional. It does exactly what you'd expect it to. And this is a very small quibble. If I'm hearing someone else talking about it this way, I'd say, wow, you're too OCD. At the same time, what I'd really like from a card is to actually be able to mind control a minion in the art, whereas Sabretooth, there's no way to mind control Sabretooth with this card. So I know that's really nitpicky, but at the same time, and also something like, well, Phoenix is clearly affecting his mind. So what is she doing with it? I guess this is the initiation of the mind control, but it'd be kind of cool for Sabretooth to strike out against Magneto or do something clearly Sabretooth wouldn't do unless he was being mind controlled. But small quibble, the art is perfectly functional. I think it looks great. Color palette is fine. I'm not an art major in any way, shape, or form, but it looks good to me. It's very simple. Not a lot going on, which gets the point across.
Agreed. I think it shows, it does a fantastic job of explaining the card, right?
Right.
I look at what the card is called and what it does, and the art seems to back that up great. Like it explains, it's an extension of the card itself. So I think it works really well in that sense. I also have to say I really, really like the color scheme in the graphic design behind the card that Phoenix's cards have, that dark green and the light green with that yellow stripe.
Definitely.
I think that's fantastic. That's really, really awesome choice. I think that graphic design choice with the 3 colors works better for some heroes than for others. I think it's great for Phoenix. And one of the things I sometimes quibble about is the faces in the corner of the cards.
Right.
I think those are sometimes really ugly and kind of distracting. Generally, they are better when they're not faces. They're better when they're masks. But this one is quite good. It's Jean Grey with long red hair. But I think it looks really good. This is one of the better ones without a mask, in my opinion. So overall, the card as a whole looks really good, graphic design and art-wise.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the colors too, and I didn't even realize it until you pointed it out. The dark green and the light green and the yellow matches their costume perfectly.
Yeah.
And then just the hint of red in the red hair on the right-hand corner where the little headshot is really just makes it pop.
Yeah, I think this is really, really great. And I think it seamlessly takes us into the theming of the card because really it does explain the card really well. And I think the card is really thematic, right, for a psionic hero. But why don't you talk a little bit about the theme of this card? Does it kind of explain what mind control is? Do you get that from this card? Do you feel Phoenix's powers in this card?
Absolutely. There are very few cards I would find in the game I would find more thematic. And this is a game I play explicitly for the theme. I don't really care how much I win. I don't really care how powerful my deck is, so long as it's fun to play and so long as it's thematic. I'm kind of a theme hound. And looking at this card and the interactions and the fun I've had with it, just reenacting scenes in a comic book that plays inside my head, Mind Control is up there with the most thematic cards I can think of. You take a minion, all of a sudden that minion isn't fighting for the villain anymore, he's fighting for you. You can talk about the ethics in a more complicated and more mature work than a comic book. Probably superheroes wouldn't be taking advantage of minds in this way ethically, but as far as a beat 'em up card game, it's perfect. And even if the minion isn't elite, there are a lot of really powerful minions you can grab and make life heck for the villain.
Yeah, I think for a psionic hero, I think it's difficult to kind of get those powers across in a card, right? I think it's a difficult power set to really explain.
Agreed.
Many of her other cards are just like, it's pictures of her and her aura or whatever, but it's just like deal damage or thwart the scheme or confuse somebody. This is one of those that I feel like really takes a different approach and really explains how her power set is different, and I quite like that. And so kind of like when I think of psionic, mind control kind of comes with that. And again, I'm not a comic reader. I say it all the time. I don't know that much about the lore or what her powers really are. I know she has some kind of mind control powers, but I think it's really cool that you can take control of someone else by like, taking over their mind or whatever. And I think this card really expresses that really, really well.
Yeah, speaking of theme, I mean, you mentioned that you're not that familiar with the comic books. I mean, Phoenix as a whole, she's, if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I've read the comics, but psionically, like her only equal might be Professor X. She is like the big kahuna when it comes to psionics. So basically, if you hear the word psionic, basically any power that you can think of, Jean Grey can do it, and she can do it really, really, really well. And so I think that's an excellent call out or shout out to the theme of this card, in that it's really hard to pinpoint exactly how psionic powers work within a game. But this card really gets inside your head, but as well as the villain or the
Look
minions, because you are literally getting inside their minds and making them do things they wouldn't ordinarily do, and for that reason, it is incredibly thematic in my eyes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Now, what I think is interesting to talk about is the power of this card. Art was great. Theme, I think, is really, really well done. Now we're talking about the power of this card, and that's where I think the bulk of our discussion is going to end up. I want to I have some comparable cards that I think I kind of want to talk through and see how this compares to cards that do something similar. It is, I will say at the start, it is expensive, right? A 4-cost card is an expensive card.
Incredibly expensive.
So for 4 or essentially 5 effective resources, including the card, as people always say, you really have to do something big. And I think that was the biggest strike when this card was teased or announced way back when, before Phoenix was released. Because as soon as something says 4, it's like, wow, that's a big cost. So it has to pay off. So one of the first cards immediately that comes to my mind when I think about this is Nova Prime. And we talked about Nova Prime in an episode a long time ago. We were pretty negative on Nova Prime. I think I'm going to be more positive on Mind Control, but immediately he discards a non-elite minion. So the comp to me starts there. He's an expensive card, he's a signature card, and he discards a non-elite minion. He has the same restriction. Do you think those are comparable, these cards?
I think Nova Prime is not anywhere close to Mind Control. And I should mention too, and I want to get this out of the way before we get too deep into this compare contrast, which I love. There are so many more minions that you can play with Mind Control than you could when the card was introduced, in my opinion. And also with Nova Prime. Non-elite back in the day, there were no minions really worth discarding for the cost, whether or not you use Star-Lord's ability to bring him out. Than Nova Prime, and I'm still really not sold on him to this day, even though I'm not a huge Star-Lord player. Whereas, especially now with all of the X-Men supports and all of the ways Phoenix can defray the cost of really expensive cards, it's not even a contest between Nova Prime and Mind Control. They do kind of the same thing, but even if they were equally costed, you don't just get rid of the minion, you get the minion to fight for you. And it's not just a block. There are some minions that even if you ignore their text, they have huge thwarts, huge attacks, huge hit point totals. And it just blows Nova Prime out of the water.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because, yes, I agree. You take this card and you essentially get rid of that minion, and then you have an ally now that fights for you, right? That's essentially what Nova Prime does. He gets rid of a non-elite minion and then provides an ally that can do things for you. And he has good stats, 2 thwart, 3 attack. In my mind, these feel pretty comparable. Nova Prime does cost more, so I think that is an issue. And that's a big issue, really, because Nova Prime relies on you using Star-Lord's ability to play him. Otherwise, he's essentially unplayable, in my mind. And I think
I would agree with that. And I didn't even think I see what you're saying. You get an ally with Nova Prime as opposed to stealing the ally from the villain, but that's not as satisfying as having a puppet. I gotta say that
Fair.
just playing a card versus playing your virtual opponent's card, theme, fun, everything. I don't know why I have a hate on for Nova Prime, but I just gotta say they're not even comparable in my mind.
Fair enough. What about Karma is another comp that I thought of that I think
Yeah,
is a newer one. Go ahead.
yeah, I've been playing a lot of Phoenix Protection recently, and I've put Karma in the deck. And 9 times out of 10, if I have the choice between Karma and Mind Control, I'm always going to choose Mind Control. Not because I don't like Karma, but just it's a lot more elegant. And also, the thing about Karma is when the minion you've stolen does thwarting or attacking, they take 2 consequential damage. Whereas with Mind Control, they take 1. Now, granted, you get an extra block with Karma because she's another ally, but the opposing factor there, the downside is she takes up another ally slot. So if you have Mind Control and you're not playing leadership, you only have 3 allies. You play Mind Control, that's 1 ally. With Karma, it functionally takes up 2 ally slots because you've got the minion you stole and Karma, who doesn't do much other than the block once the minion's gone.
Yeah, I think they are pretty comparable, except like you said, the ally thing is different, and it takes 2 consequential damage, which is a big negative, right? That essentially cuts in half the number of activations you can get out of it. But Karma is accessible to other characters, unlike Mind Control, so I think that's fair. Mind Control should be better.
Fair point.
What about Ambush, which is a new pool card? It is a 1-cost upgrade. It has a crisis icon on it, and you attach it to a side scheme, max 1 per side scheme, and as an interrupt, when the attached side scheme is defeated, you discard a non-elite minion.
So that's funny that you should bring up Deadpool. The pool aspect, the only time I ever played that was to play Vision Pool with you. So I'm not really familiar with any of the Deadpool cards. I'm kind of, in listening to podcasts and knowing you personally, I'm kind of the opinion you are with when it comes to Deadpool. It's a cute gag, but it's not worth 15 or 40 cards to try and maneuver around. I'm not familiar with that card, so points for me would go to Phoenix just because she's my favorite hero, but I know that's probably not a statistically or mechanically satisfying answer. I'm gonna have to defer to this. I'm gonna have to defer to you on this one, Boomguy. I'm not really sure. I'm not
That's
familiar
totally
with
fair.
that card.
That's totally fair. No, I'm just bringing up. I went through and I dug through a bunch of cards that I thought did something similar, and so I'm just throwing out comps here.
Great. It's a great idea. I will say, just like Nova Prime, you get the minion. So it's board control, but it's instead of just taking a pawn off the board, the pawn becomes yours.
Yes.
So maybe it's that possessive streak that I like, and I don't think Ambush does that.
Yeah, I mean, Mind Control gives you control of that character, whereas Ambush just discards it. Other ones that are similar are things like Beat Cop, which can be used to damage minions. It's not limited to non-elite, but Beat Cop requires you to pay 3 and build up over time. You are collecting things off the scheme, right? So you're thwarting essentially with it, and then you can discard it to damage a minion, which again doesn't give you control, but is some other forms of minion control. Eyes in the Sky is similar. It's a 0-cost upgrade, and when you reveal a non-elite minion, you exhaust an aerial character you control and discard that card to cancel the effects of that card and discard it.
I tried to play Eyes in the Sky. I was really excited about it because it was kind of a new justice mechanic when it came out, and I just couldn't get it to work consistently to the extent that I wanted. And Angel has so many better cards. I guess you don't have to play with Angel, but that's the only one I tried it with. And I wasn't able to pull it off. Whereas with Beat Cop is kind of the same thing. Mind Control gets you the minion right away. Beat Cop and Eyes in the Sky, you kind of you've got a plan and play. And I'm really all about I have a short attention span when it comes to board control.
Fair enough. I think Eyes in the Sky I've used with Black Widow. You can get aerial allies out there, and it's a preparation, so you can play it as a preparation for free and draw a card off her ability, and then you can leave it there and exhaust any ally with aerial and trigger that. So I think it's cool there. and it's some non-elite minion control, which is kind of where it fits in this. Sticking with Justice, there's Take Out the Guards, which is a player side scheme. Are you familiar with that one?
I am. Yeah, I played with it in a Gwen Stacy deck that uses predictable ploy. It needed a side scheme in the victory display, and I thought I just put it in there to have a card to maximize my chances of finding a side scheme in the victory display or a player side scheme, and it was just almost never worth it. It had its moments, but what it does for how much work you need to put into it and the card lay, I think it costs a lot more than Mind Control long game.
Yeah, I think Take Out the Cards is a bad card. I'm just throwing it out as other options to deal with minions.
Absolutely.
There's a couple other pool aspect cards that I'll throw in. Just going to go through the list here, and we can kind of see what we think about them. There's Head Pool and Lady Dead Pool. And I know you said you are not super familiar with the way these things operate in the pool. Head Pool is a 3-cost ally, 2 thwart, 1 attack. And after Head Pool attacks and damages a minion, that minion attacks another enemy of your choice.
No, I can get down with that. That's a good card. I remember seeing Mr. Meeson play that when Deadpool first came out, and I really enjoyed seeing that in action.
And Lady Deadpool is a 4-cost ally with 2 thwart, 2 attack, and when defeated, you defeat a non-elite minion. So another way to deal with non-elite minions. I think Lady Deadpool is pretty solid. As you know, it's a pool, so disclaimer, you have to enjoy playing pool. There's also Moondragon, which is just a bad card.
I want to like Moondragon, but her effect is just, I don't know that it's necessarily expensive, but the fact that you have to discard her just makes her unplayable in my eyes.
Yeah, just for the listeners, Moondragon's a 3-cost ally, 1 thwart, 1 attack, 2 hit points, and as an action, you can exhaust and discard Moondragon to choose a minion. That minion attacks another enemy of your choice. It's bad. It would be better maybe if you just discarded Moondragon and she discarded a non-elite minion or something, but Moondragon I don't think is ever in any decks. Then there's cards like Magic, the X-Men ally. What do you think about her?
I've played her a little bit when Cyclops first came out. She didn't make a huge amount of waves. I really like the art on that card, but she didn't really. Again, she never really. Whenever I put her out, there wasn't a minion out, so my experience is a little biased. I think, like a lot of X-Men allies, her effect is really conditional, and you kind of have to plan around it. And I'm not sure the juice is worth the squeeze when it comes to planning around that Magic ally.
I agree. I think Magic has potential, but isn't great in practice. Magic is a 3-cost ally, 1 thwart, 2 attack with a response. After you play Magic from your hand, you can spend a mental resource, choose a non-elite minion, engage with an X-Men hero, shuffle that minion into the encounter deck. It's incredibly limited. It gets you an ally and gets rid of a non-elite minion, I suppose. It shuffles it into the deck, which is just objectively worse than discarding it. But you have to have the card and have the minion, engage with an X-Men hero, and have a mental resource to spare. There's a lot of things you have to set up, and it's only non-elite minions, so the payoff isn't always great. You want more?
I always want more. I will say one thing that I just thought of. One of the great things about Mind Control, and I know there are ways to search for allies and other things like you've mentioned here to compare Mind Control to, but Mind Control can be brought out with superpower training, and with Phoenix's high thwart, it's just, especially solo, it's just a no-brainer. You just put superpower training out and you don't clear the scheme until you have a minion you want to take. So it's just kind of like, again, I'm not a huge fan of the long game. I'm kind of like turn by turn, see what happens. But that's just an incredible feeling when you can plan ahead like that.
Agreed. I have 2 more for you I'm going to go through. And then we can talk about other stuff. So one of the ones I have is Web Binding, which is a card from the Ghost Spider set. It's one of her signature cards, which is a superpower that you have to spend at least 1 mental resource on, but it's an event, and when an enemy would activate, you cancel that activation, and if a minion's activation was canceled that way, you can deal 4 damage to that minion. My comps are starting to get a little farther, I think, away. This isn't exactly comparable anymore.
But I get it.
It's some minion control.
Yeah, I mean, I like this card, but the way I play, at least my personal style, I almost always cancel the villain.
I think everybody does.
Yeah, especially because if you're playing the way the board with, let me start over. If you're playing with a mind towards if you're playing with a mind towards board control, you're really wanting to not ping damage the minions so much, and a lot of minions just have more than 4 health at this point. So I don't know. It's just so situational. I would almost go with damaging or canceling the villain attack rather than any individual minion's attack.
Agreed. I think the last one I wanted to bring up here quickly is one from Phoenix's set, actually. Mental Paralysis, which is a 2-cost upgrade. It says hero form only attached to a non-elite minion. Attached minion cannot activate. And as a force response, after you flip to alter ego form, you discard this card. What do you think about this one?
This one got a lot of negative press back in the day when it came out. And I've come around to it. I actually enjoy it. And I understand why people don't like the card as much. It's because every time you flip down, it goes away. And Phoenix really likes to flip down. As part of her kit. And it, especially as I've been playing through Apocalypse, Age of Apocalypse, there are a lot of minions you don't necessarily want to take and you don't have the firepower to take out. And just putting that on them, it kind of works as pinned down. And you just don't have to worry about that minion. And it is situational, but again, it's a feel-good situational. I don't mind it as much as, say, Magic, who I don't really have any affection for. It's just Phoenix doing what Phoenix does.
I think this is just worse than Pin Down, I will say, in my opinion.
Yeah, I get that.
Pin Down is locked to an aspect. So, you only have access to it if you're in protection, but I guess you could say the same about this. You only have access to it if you're playing Phoenix. Pin Down, I love Pin Down. We talked about that in one of the early episodes. I think it's a great card. It's 0 cost, and, -2 is awesome. And essentially, the thing about Mental Paralysis is that you can't use it to cancel a scheme activation because when you flip down, it goes away.
Right.
So if it was just minion cannot activate, then it would be way better, obviously, because you could leave it there and it would be better than Pin Down. As it is, it just feels like a worse Pin Down.
Well, let me provide a counterpoint, or at least context. I agree 100% with what you're saying. I will say that, especially in the Age of Apocalypse, and I can't think of any at the top of my head, but a lot of the minions in that set have when the minion attacks, do this. And that is always a feel bad. And so if I can just get the minion to stop attacking, actually it's the Genosha set in the Dark Beast scenario. It's every time the villain attacks, bad things happen. If you can just get the minion to stop attacking, then you'll be good. However, because pinned down, they'll still attack. They'll attack for 0, but then that effect will still go off. It's a minor situational thing, but it does have particular advantage. But I think you're right that it might be a little overcosted for what you get.
Yeah, I think it should maybe cost 1, but that's my personal opinion. I think for me, in all the comps I mentioned, the closest one is clearly Nova Prime. I think Nova Prime is the most direct comparison here. He provides a body on the board for you with good stats, also gets rid of a non-elite minion, which is essentially what this card does, but I like Nova Prime a lot less.
Sure, I see what you're saying mechanically. I can't help but look at the game thematically. To
Fair.
me, the clearest analog is Karma, because she is literally controlling someone's mind.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand what you're saying from a pure chess, tactician strategy perspective. But for me, it's just like they have pink auras around their heads. They're going inside the villains' minds or the minions' minds. Karma is the closest analog in my book. But I totally get what you're saying in terms of board control, that Nova would be equivalent.
I wish that the controlled keyword did something.
Yeah, it might. Isn't it in the Shadow King too? Or am I making that up?
I think it is in Shadow King, yeah. But I wish she had cards to interact with it in some way that gave me, if Pin Down was also controlled somehow, or Karma also gives the controlled keyword. If there was other things that had the controlled keyword, then there was some way that psionic characters had to interact with the controlled keyword. I think that would be really cool.
That's a really good call out. Because you could heal a controlled ally, or you can make the controlled ally activate without any consequential damage or something like that. I mean, it would be a really niche build, or a janky build, but that's what I love because that's thematic and it's not necessarily going to beat Expert Magneto solo, but it's something that I would love to see. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, or even if it was like a mass attack kind of card where you exhausted
Hmm.
all controlled allies and did damage to the villain equal to all their attacks or something like that, that just would be
Sure.
like a cool multiplayer card where you have a controlled minion because you pinned it down, and I have a controlled minion because I played Karma, and I can exhaust them both to do something. Things like that would be really cool because they give them these keywords and then it doesn't really do anything or pay off in any way. And I wish it did.
Sure. And the thing, I'm trying to think of another superhero that they could come out with that could maybe play with the controlled aspect, excuse me, the controlled trait keyword. But the only ones I can think of are villains
Hmm.
because, again, of that ethical bind of like controlling someone's mind. I mean, I guess if they ever put out a Professor X character, but I'm not sure that's going to happen since we've had so many news.
I just think it could be another, obviously they didn't go this route, but it could have been another psionic thing that kind of unites them
Right.
as a trait, right? If you're a psionic
Hmm.
character, you care about the controlled keywords somehow.
Hmm.
I don't know. They didn't go that way. I think it's a missed opportunity, but I'm not a game designer.
Sure, and another thing I'll point out too. As much as I love Phoenix, if I had to level any criticism at the game design, which again I'm not going to do because I love this game and I couldn't come up with the cards the way the game designers do. But one minor quibble is that she's trying to serve so many masters. We've got the psionic thing. We've got the restrained, unrestrained thing. We've got things that I'm not thinking about right now that will come to me later. But she has a lot of things going on, and so one of those masters isn't necessarily going to be served as fully as another one.
That's fair. Is there some points you want to make? I've been kind of driving this conversation.
One thing that I was thinking about when I was thinking about this card is it's too bad it's so expensive. But then you think, well, it's a really powerful card because you're effectively stealing from the villain. It's board control and it's extra thwarter damage on your side, and the villain loses a card. That said, I was hoping that it would interplay with uh, tying those themes together. I was hoping it could maybe interplay with restrained and unrestrained in such a way that it costs less when you are unrestrained. But
Hmm.
then the whole aspect of mind control that seems really focused and not in an unleashed state. And so maybe Phoenix isn't necessarily controlling a lot of minds when she's wreaking havoc when the Dark Phoenix is tempting her. So
Hmm.
maybe that was a flavor decision more than a mechanics decision. But I do wish that this card and mental paralysis interacted with the restrained and unrestrained, excuse me, restrained and unleashed versions of her play kit because that I think would make them sing even more.
Yeah, I think I have to talk about. I got to bring up the cost again. I
Yeah,
think for me, the cost is the biggest issue here. I
sure.
think it is a cool card. 4 is a lot to pay for anything, right? Like
Hmm.
how many good 4 cost cards can you really name? Like we talked about Nick Fury early on in the show. I think Nick Fury's a solid card, but he replenishes cards immediately when he goes out. This is almost an entire turn to play this.
Sure. I understand what you're saying. Thematically, though, especially with the release of the card The Power of the Mind and all of the excellent X-Men supports, and the fact that Phoenix's kit has a setup extra resource in her kit. All of those things mitigate it to make it really much less expensive. And it makes sense. The more powerful she gets, the more likely she's going to mind control a minion, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I've had turns where I have two Power of the Minds in my hand. Now those are rare. Usually, when I have Power of the Mind in my hand, mind control is the last thing that I pick. But her Phoenix Force card, allowing her to get counters, the X Jet, the Weapon X, all of the X-Men supports that provide more resources really defray the cost. Now I can hear Boomguy in my head going, well, yeah, then why don't you play other cards that don't cost as much that are
Yep.
better? To which I
Yep.
say, you don't get to control the mind of a minion. That to me, if it were 5, I totally agree with you. I really think I agree with you that it's expensive, but in my opinion, for the kind of game that I like to play, it is worth the cost. But I totally get how someone else it may not be worth it to them.
I think that's fair. And as a guy who cares about theme a lot, like you said, I think the thematics here are unassailable. Like, this is super thematic and feels like Phoenix, and it all works together. I just think it is limited somewhat because of what the designers wrote on the card. It has to be a non-elite minion.
Sure.
So you have to have a minion in play that is non-elite, right? So baseline, when you have this in your hand, that has to be available to you. Also, often, non-elite minions can range, and sometimes it feels like when I have this in my hand, I feel like it's not worth playing on a minion that isn't that strong. Like, if I could just knock it out, then it's not worth playing this card often.
I'll counter by agreeing with you and also saying it is a situational card. Like, you're not going to go into Rhino playing mind control. I mean, it's not worth mind controlling the Hydra Bomber. It's not worth mind controlling most of Claw's minions unless they have tough. I will say, though, that one of the best games I ever played was a con, and we played Master Mold, and I got a Sentinel Mark 8 without any health or without any damage on it, and that lasted me the whole game, just destroying, thwarting everything. I felt like a god. It was a great play experience, and I will spend four resources for that.
That particular scenario is great for this card because there's a ton of really strong minions that are not elite, and many of them get upgrades. So I also played a Phoenix deck against Master Mold a number of times, and you can get those tough Sentinels out with a bunch of upgrades that make them even stronger.
Right.
And they're only taking one consequential every time. And then you take control of that thing, and it's got 6 hit points or whatever, 8 hit points. I don't even know how much to say. They have a lot. And they do 2, 3, 4 attack, depending on the upgrades that are on them. And like you said, in those times, it feels awesome. And those are the same times that Nova Prime feels great, when that ally, that minion's in front of you, and you just vaporize it by playing it, and you feel awesome. But outside of that, go ahead. No, go.
I will say, I'm in complete agreement with you. Not every card is fit for every villain, and that's one of the reasons I like Phoenix so much. And I want to focus on mind control, but I also want to say this is one tool in an arsenal of cards that she has, right? So you're not gonna throw it out every villain. You're not even going to throw it out in every Sentinel game, because maybe there are other options you play, especially if you go Unleashed like in the first couple of turns. I will say, though, that it's all about the theme for me, and even when you get a substandard minion, just having the board control can really swing the game in your direction.
Yeah.
Sorry, I completely lost the thread there. But
no, I agree. I think when it hits, it's awesome. I just find it hits a lot less than I would like it to. And so the power, I think, is held back in that sense.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And this is what I wanted to say earlier, is that it's two different play styles, two different types of players. Some people chase those big moments, and other people's really want a baseline consistency. And I've played decks where there's a baseline consistency, and I enjoy them, but I'm really chasing that thrill. I'm really chasing, the optic blast that destroys the villain. I'm really chasing the Wolverine hit that takes out like 3 or 4 minions. I'm really looking to for this game to be a hero simulator, and sometimes it doesn't always hit, just because if it were consistently those moments were super consistent, they would be lessened somehow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point and an interesting way to describe the player base of this game, because I think a lot of the discourse online about the game centers around and comes from these players who are in pursuit of this ruthless efficiency. The ones who insist to me that Venom is one of the strongest heroes in the game because he can consistently do 2 thwart, 2 damage, 1 here, 1, like he's consistent, and like you just can't stop it. It's just going and going, and the cost curve, blah, blah, blah. And there are other players, Lazy Titan is one of them, who wants to play Dive Bomb over and over again, and he wants to blast for huge numbers and have huge turns with Nova where he clears every minion in every side scheme. And there's players like you who want to slap this down and take an awesome minion and take control. I think that's a really interesting, you may have stumbled on a really good classification of players. I think I'm more towards the latter. I think I'm more with the big moments, and I think those are fun. You need some efficiency to get there, right, to stay alive. But
Sure.
I think that's a cool point.
Yeah, my plays. If I had to sum up my play style, and I've met some other players, especially at Con, who feel this way. It's about thematic kismet, right? It's about. I'm thinking of a game I played recently. It's about having 2 power of the minds in your hand: karma, mind control, trying to choose which one to do, and really, that makes it worth all of the times that you have karma, mind control, and 3 resources, and you can't pay for either of them, right? To the peaks and the valleys. Now, not that I enjoy the valleys, but those peaks provide the contracts. Those valleys provide the contrast you need to make the peaks feel even more awesome. Because if you read a comic book or you watch a cartoon, these are superheroes, right? So obviously their peaks are more frequent than in the game. But they still stumble. They don't have, if you're in the heat of battle with Magneto or you're in the heat of battle with the Marauders, these characters don't always do the exact right thing. If they did, there would be no tension in the comic book or the cartoon or the little role-playing game you're playing in your head. So for me, the bad hands, for me, the missteps, they add to the flavor of the game in a way that ruthless efficiency, while I respect, it's a little too technical for my tastes.
We agree there. I don't like turning the game into math homework, which I think can happen sometimes. Well, I think it can happen and say, well, this card is 3 effective resources for 6 damage, and but it also does a stun, and that's valued at 1.5 resources, so I'm not getting the curve here, blah blah blah. Like I'm not trying to yuck anyone's yums. If that's how you enjoy the game, I'm happy for you. I can't get there. That just becomes really dull for me. Sure. So, and I'm not super thematic either. I'm not like all the way theme. I'm in the middle.
Right. Yeah, and it's a dangerous slope because in the beginning, especially during the pandemic, especially in the Guardians wave, I got caught up in that, and I don't have that mind, right? It'd be one thing if I were a mathematician, or it'd be one thing if I had the mind that could really analyze the cards and see immediately what they do and what their value ratio is and what their resource cost is long term. Like, I honestly really admire the people that can do that. And that is more rife for discussion, especially on the Discords. It creates a lot more discussion because you can, quote unquote, objectively determine a card's worth. But at the end of the day, we're playing cards with superheroes on them, and it shouldn't feel like you said, like math homework. It should feel like Vision is punching out Ultron, or it should feel like Jean Grey is wiping out the board with her mind control powers. It when you reduce it to numbers, it loses a lot of its charm for me.
Yeah, I don't want the game to feel like an Excel spreadsheet. But it's just me. Everyone can enjoy it how they want. Okay, well, I think that is a good transition into the fun, which is kind of the last part we talk about before we go to final thoughts on the card. How fun is mind control, Bendrix?
You've offered up a lot of good points about the cost, and I take them and still think that this is a great time. I'm thinking of the last game I played with it. I played the final stage of Apocalypse, and I took over the Scarab minion, and it had this nasty whenever it attacks effect, and it has a 3 attack, and I brought Apocalypse down with it. In fact, the Scarab took out Apocalypse, and sending a minion against its master, there are a few feelings in the game I enjoy more. That said, I think its cost is kind of prohibitive. It is not a card for everybody, but that's the fun of it. When it hits, it's just a great time.
I'm fully behind you on that. I think this card is super fun. My quibbles with it in terms of cost and the situational nature of the card all fall under power for me. That's where the card, I think, is held back. But when I actually play this card out, when it hits, when it removes a minion and puts it on my side and gives me another ally, it's awesome. It feels good. It feels really fun to slap this card down. The times I don't play it, it's just a resource. I spend it, so it doesn't feel not fun in that sense. It's just I'm not playing it really.
So, question for you:
Yeah,
if it were 3 cost, do you think you'd play it every time there was a minion on the board?
it's a good question. I think
I
it
mean,
would still.
even something like a really cheap minion that doesn't really affect the board that much,
Yeah, I don't know, like a Hydra Patrol or something, a 1/1.
or a gun
I
runner,
don't know.
weapons runner.
Yeah, like one of those core set, like weapons runner cards. Would I play if it was 3 costs? Would I play it? Probably not on those, right? I think it's just, to go back to the math armor thing, it's just like on a curve, right? The cheaper the card is, the more frequently I will play it. That's just like,
Sure.
those are always together. I think if it was 3 costs, I'd play it a lot more, and I would play it on a bunch of minions that now I think, if it has 3 hit points and I'm Phoenix, if I'm unleashed, I can just kill it with my basic attack and take care of that problem, and maybe I can spend my resources on something else.
Right.
So I don't know. I think it becomes less situational, or the more situations it applies to, the increase as the card gets cheaper. So I don't think I played every time at 3. At 2, I probably played on every single minion that I come across.
Right, but then I don't think it would be fairly costed. I think it would
No,
be.
no. I wish it was any minion, to be honest.
I don't know though.
I think at 4 cost. No?
But if you, I'm trying to think of the prelates. Like if you were able to just, Apocalypse keeps coming up in my mind because I just played through the campaign recently.
Yeah.
But if you could just take a prelate, I mean, that would be game breaking. Or I mean, because like when the Winning Hand podcast was talking about Nova, I was 100% in everything that you said on the card and its drawbacks about elite minions. But now I think there are just so many more powerful minions that could just wreck a villain's day to an unfun degree and not really be much of a challenge if Phoenix could just snap her fingers and that minion was hers. I mean, maybe there could be, just spitballing here, but maybe there could be another keyword, but that would just add more rules, like, Iron Will or something like that, that would make the minion, there would be a reason why, instead of them just being too powerful mechanically, that there would be a reason why, like, say, Mr. Sinister, he's like super psionic. There's no way you're going to get into his head. Magneto is super, has that helmet. There are reasons why these minions, I guess Magneto's not a minion, but you get my point. There's a reason, a thematic reason why these minions can't be mind controlled other than it would break the game.
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear you say that to some degree as Mr. Theme here, right? I don't think her psionic powers necessarily apply to, or don't apply to a more difficult minion or a more powerful enemy.
Sure.
I feel like thematically it applies. I see what you're saying. I think it was anybody, it could break the game. I just, the elite, non-elite distinction in a lot of cards, I don't quite understand. It's not always clear to me why a minion is or isn't elite.
Fair.
I can think of examples either way where I think this seems like it should be elite based on how the game is, or this seems like it shouldn't be, but here we are.
Well, at the con, when I discovered that the Marauders weren't elite, the Marauder minions were elite, that was a good time. And again, part of the reason I love this card is the discovery. I don't have all the cards memorized, so when I put Phoenix up against any given encounter, it's like, oh, I can take you, I can't take you. It's almost like cherry picking at a candy store.
Yeah, no. So overall, I think it's pretty fun, and then let's transition into the final slots and final score on the card. I'll let you go last. Let you have the last word as the guest. So I'll go first. I think this card is really good. I think the art is awesome. The thematics of the card are 10 out of 10. I think it's really fun. For me, it's only held back a little bit in the power department. And it's the same thing as I mentioned before. I think the cost isn't too high necessarily for what the card does, but 4 cost can be prohibitive sometimes. If you have a smaller hand size or something happens that makes you discard a card, or you play a card, a defense card, and so you have fewer in your hand when your turn comes around, or there's something else that requires your attention, or there isn't an elite minion, or a non-elite minion rather. So there's a lot of reasons I think it doesn't always get played that often, but when it does, it's super fun. And I'll give it some bonus points because the art is so good. I always like when cards that stick around have better art, because it's going to sit on the table for a while and I have to look at it for multiple turns. So I want the art to be a little more standout than an event where I just see for a minute and it's gone. So bonus points for that. I think overall I'm going to go with 8.5 on this card. I think this card's really strong and really good. And if it was any cheaper, it'd be pushing up even closer. I think this is a really good card in all the categories. It scores really high. So what do you think?
Well, I'm flattered that you think the card is so amazing since it was my choice.
Well, you didn't make the card.
Didn't I? No, I didn't. I've got to say, though, I'm in complete agreement with you other than I think it deserves a 0.5 bump. I'm not as hot on the art as you are. I think it's competent. I think it's good. I mean, there's certainly much worse cards. But I think you brought me around to understanding that, simpler is better. It shows exactly what it does in the card, especially since, I mean, the text is so long. You want to focus on the text and the card art be a little bit of decoration. I see your point about the cost. I disagree because I think the big moments deserve a lot of resources. Like if you're down a card or the villain attacks you and you're required to put down a defense, you're not going to be as focused, or Phoenix isn't going to be as focused and isn't going to be able to pull off that mind control. So again, I'm a slave to theme, and I think this card nails the theme. And then as far as fun, I've already said, I think it's super fun. I'm not going to give it a 10 out of a 10 because I don't think it's absolutely perfect because it is so situational. It is so conditional. But I mean, I've only grown to love this card more as I've thought about it in preparation for our talk. And I just love playing Phoenix in general. I generally ignored it when I first started just because it was so expensive. But now that I understand and inform my own thoughts about it, it's only gone up in my estimation. So not a 10, but definitely a 9 out of 10.
9 out of 10. Okay. Well, we were pretty positive about this card overall, both of us. I think it's a really unique card. I know I say it's unique, and I spent like half the episode talking about comparable cards, but you understand what I mean.
None of them reached that level of uniqueness. I think it only proved your point.
Yes, that's a good point. I was right all along. Thank you for that. Well, listener, if you made it this far, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please take 30 seconds, if you wouldn't mind, and rate and review on whatever platform you listen on. It does mean a lot. And if you didn't, then I hope you find a podcast that fits your interests better, and don't waste your time on this one. Anyway, that's all for this episode. Thanks, Bendrix, for coming along and going on this journey through the mind with me. It's been a good time. It's good to see you again. And I will see everybody next time. See you later, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.